Welcome to the Lifeline, a production of Simply BJE. The goal of this podcast is to build, inspire, and to empower our listeners through conversations on business, leadership, and mental health. We invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and at www.simplybje.com/the Lifeline. Now, let's tune in for today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Lifeline. Today's conversation is about identity. Who are you when marriage ends, when depression hits, when faith feels confusing, when the version of yourself you thought you were falls apart? Our guest today is Deshaun Davis, storyteller, filmmaker, songwriter, mentor, and teacher, a man who has walked through divorce, depression, faith deconstruction, and then restoration. Deshaun, welcome to the Lifeline. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Man, we're glad to have you. Glad to have you.
Looking forward to it, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I think one of the hard things for a man isn't just going through something difficult. It's realizing that the version of himself he believed in might not survive the challenges and the change. We build identity around roles: husband, father, provider, believer, leader, creative, strong one. But when life hits hard, some of those labels don't hold. So let me ask you this. When life started unraveling for you, what part of your life fell apart first, as it were?
You know, I think that takes me back, to just remembering the cycle that continued to unravel for me. Um, I think some of the things that I can remember started was my self-worth. Was something that I think was attacked at first, just the sense of inadequacy. You feel as though things should work a certain kind of way, things should, move a certain kind of way. And when they don't, I was always the type to internalize it. So for me, I think my life was written with a series of moments where I just questioned myself, my existence, my value, because the way I was wired, I wasn't around a lot of people wired like me. So for me to try to find some identity was difficult, and so you know, I found myself, just in this overcompensation, this extra effort that was often not needed at the moment that things that I thought were going to last didn't. And that became a pattern that I had to learn to work throughout the years because I just found myself stuck in that place whenever I ran into a wall.
So when you recognized you were in that pattern, how did you respond to that? Or did you know how to respond initially?
I'm thankful that I grew up with a rooted relationship with Christ that I didn't know was real until I needed it. At some point, I thought in my life, a lot of the things that I had in me was church and was this ceremonial experience that I had to go to because if I didn't, mama was going to take care of me. So, that kind of became my, reason that I thought I had to go to church and had to be in this environment. But somewhere in between those experiences, something happened to me. So inside of me was a resilience that I believe God put there that just allowed me to bounce back, allowed me to always be connected to a source that would pull me out of those tough times. And so I've always had that, my life has been filled with uh, several, I should say, responses to trauma throughout my life. But there's been a constant theme of God's hand that was always there to help me pull through some of those situations when I didn't have any hope.
Yeah, man. And so welcome again, Deshaun, man. So glad you're on to share your story with us.
Thank you.
I know during our pre-conversation, you were talking about a series of changes and transformations and, transitions, if you will.
Mhm.
And, there was a period where you had to take a step back, because sometimes we don't even realize something deeper is really happening. So at what point did you realize that this just wasn't a bad season or bad pattern, it was something deeper?
Well, I think, if I can move into my adult life, I think I realized after going through several divorces, I realized that, I got to focus a little bit on something because I'm starting to notice a pattern. All of these ladies are saying the same thing. So either they have a group chat or they share notes, or somehow there's the same issue everybody's having. So it's like, I'm like, these guys never have crossed paths, but they seem to have the same problem with me. And at that point, I started to realize that there's a common denominator here. There's somebody that is responsive to all of these individuals that we might need to pay attention to, and that was me. And I can remember one time, my second wife, we were having challenges, and we were going back and forth, and I remember crying out to God. I'm like, God, what's going on with this woman? This situation is just not getting any better. What's the problem? He said, I really felt like God was communicating to me in this way. It was like, hey, well, let's talk about it. He said, so when you met her, was she this way? I said, no. He said, okay, so she's been following you, right? I said, yeah, she's been following me. He said, okay. He said, so I think what you're dealing with right now is the part of her that's become like you. And so what you're facing is the fact that she's now like you and you don't like her, which really means you don't like you. And so as I examined that, I started to see that these patterns that had been happening throughout my relationships were things that I had learned and that I had been given to other people. And that was the first time I was able to see myself and really realize that, there's something going on here. And until I get to the bottom of that, this thing is going to keep happening.
Man, as a man, to say I do 3 times, that's very powerful because you fell in love 3 times and you made that decision 3 times. And you said there is a common denominator, which happened to be you. But what do you think the false belief that you had within yourself, and when did you accept the truth, and how did that really change your life? Because there had to be something that you were believing about yourself every time you went up and said I do to these young ladies.
Well, the way I was raised, I talked to my guys sometimes in the barbershop. I remember I had this meeting one time and everybody was kind of, picking at me for being married so many times. And I said, well, let me tell you, let's look at it like this. I said, guys, if you did the same thing that I did with the women that I married, you guys have probably been married about 40 times. I said, because for me, I'm just going to make a commitment, and so although those relationships were written with my immaturity and my lack of development as a man, definitely as a father, there were so many things I didn't know. As a result of those things, I ended up being in these relationships that revealed certain things in me, but I was going to be one that committed. That was one thing you were going to find about me, is I was going to make a commitment. I was going to pledge myself to you, but I did a lot of those things immaturely and without the stamina and skill set that I think men need to have. And I talk to men all the time now, and I tell them, sometimes you have to understand when you're ready or when you're not ready. Can you do enough self-auditing to understand if you're prepared to be able to engage into a relationship with someone? And I can look at my life and say there were many times where I just wasn't prepared nor qualified to be in a relationship. And so the discovery for me was the closed doors that I ran into, and the relationships that didn't fruitfully develop and grow like the ones I saw around me at times. Those were the things that made me realize that something is wrong, and there's a pattern that I keep repeating that has to be addressed. Because in every area, I saw it peek its head, not only in the relational sides of my relationships, but I saw it in business. I saw it in a lot of my interpersonal relationships. And I had to realize that there's something that needed to be addressed. And when I focused on that and saw where the root was, I started to learn how to crawl myself out. And then God could take hold of my effort to get out and brought me through those situations.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's I want to hone in on something you just said, because I think there's something in there. One of the things you said about being prepared and having the skill set for long term, because I think a lot of times when we start to think about relationships as men, and I think this is particularly important now because, some reports out there that more men are looking to get married and in a relationship than there are women. Don't know necessarily how true that is, but it's kind of out there. And so what happens, I think, when we think about being prepared, we just think about, is our money right? It's all really much material, but it doesn't sound like that's really what you're speaking to. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit more and dig into about preparedness and readiness for relationships?
Absolutely. I've learned that there is more of a necessity that we should place on ourselves as men for our internal and emotional development than I would even say our financial development. You know, when you enter into a relationship, there are so many dynamics to that relationship that if you don't understand how to navigate, then you're going to always be curious about why you run into these issues and situations. And for me, I like to I like to look at love as being something that you make a decision to do. And it's also the navigation that you take with someone. You don't just make a standard decision to love, but love is a navigating around the emotions and the ups and the downs and the good times and bad times. And it takes skill to be able to do that effectively. And a lot of times we think that things are going to just come natural. When I counsel guys a lot and talk to some of my mentees, and they'll say, this is what I'm going to do for my wife, and this is how I'm going to be. And I always ask them this question: where'd you get that from? Where'd you get that from? Where are you basing the decisions you're making? And we have this common thing I'll say to them is, by what picture are you living your life? Like what example do you have that you're looking at and examining that is giving you the confirmation that this is the right way to do it? And so for me, I didn't have enough of those in front of me that were stable enough that I should have been following. So a lot of us as men, we live through osmosis. Like we're just kind of like going, we think, what it means to be a man is to be strong. What it means to be a man is to, have bravado. What it means to be a man is to do these different things. But the emotional side of our intellect, the emotional side of how we process information is going to be the thing that allows us to properly navigate relationships as we understand how to do things like say, I'm wrong, how we learn how to adjust by learning. I had to realize something once, and somebody said, man, I can't believe you even said that. I wrote a post about my ex-wives, and I talked about how much they taught me. And to some of the brothers, they sound like a cuss word. They're like, wait a minute, the women don't teach. I'm the man of the house. It's me. No. I had to realize that there were things that I didn't learn that I was taught by these women that were in my life that allowed me to gain a greater sense of emotional development. And over time, that's been the thing that has drawn me closer to a more pure approach to relationships and to how to adjust to the things that don't work in them.
So what you're saying is very powerful because this past Sunday, I sat on a panel with 2 other couples and 3 singles, and the 3 singles were PhD doctors, and we were discussing the role of a man and a woman, not only in dating but in marriage. And what you said about learning how to find your emotions being more important than the financial standpoint was one of the topics that came up. Because 2 of the doctors were successful, they were single, and they were looking to be married, Bo. These brothers were like, we can't find virtuous women, and they said they were in the church. They said, we want somebody to marry, to build this life with, but they took the time to find their emotions and not just focus on their finances, because that's what we were taught to be: the priest, the provider, the protector. I've been doing 22 years with my wife, and I had to learn a lot because I didn't have an example. And she was patient enough with me to teach me some things. And then I had to, bow down to God and listen. And I think so many men don't do that part. Just saying, look, I had to look in the mirror and say, you don't know. Your mom was single.
That's
your dad died.
That's
so since you don't know, listen to her. Her parents have been together 40-some years. Her grandparents married 60 years. So there's a foundation there. Learn, boy. And I had to just concede with that.
But you know what? I want to tap in on what you're saying there. I think there's even a stage before learning, which is learning to learn. A lot of times we think that we are just going to naturally have these capabilities to take in information and know how to process a woman. Let's go back and examine our capabilities to even process information.
So Deshaun, would that be experience?
I think it's experience, but I think there is a practical process of examining the fruit from your experiences and from what you've done that should help you realize that you may have some molecules off in your ability to learn how to process information. You know, it's almost like some singles, I look at them, tell them, hey, I see your issue is you have a bad picker. So you don't have to get into the examination of this person as much as you need to back up and understand what makes you engage in these type of people.
Yeah.
You know, how much attention do you focus on yourself to know that this is what I'm attracting because this is who I am?
Wow.
So there's stages prior to getting to the place of, you know, examining the attributes or the results from these relationships. A lot of times we just don't even understand what's the process of me deciding on a companion. You know, it's like, you know, if you've never been around people that understand vehicles, who's to say you know what kind of car you need? Who's to say you're prepared? I remember I had an example when I was in Vegas one time and I went to rent a car and they didn't have any that was available. And so they said, you got to take this Corvette. And I was like, okay, well, I thank you. I'll take the Corvette. I get in the Corvette, I peel out of there and I put my foot on the gas right down by the strip in Vegas. And that doggone car went spinning in the circle so many times. And just, I mean, I was like, you know, I think I spoke in all kind of tongues. I think I spoke in Japanese tongues, the spiritual tongue. I was, and the car stopped and nothing happened. And I realized I had no business being in that car. I do not know how to drive this kind of car. And so a lot of times that's where we find ourselves in relationships, you know, and I'll let you guys chop in on this one. It's like, I think you even have to examine if you qualify for that kind of woman.
Wow.
You know, I realized when I met my wife, when I told you guys I was married for three times. The three, yeah. Look at you. Is that a joke? I think that was a joke. I think that was a joke. I think that was a jab. No, yeah. So after 3 wives, after 3 tries and 3 strikeouts, I stopped and I was single for 7 years. That 7 years was filled with therapy. I've got clocked right now over 10,000 hours of self-development.
Wow.
And so I went on a serious journey with me and God to kind of say, we got to figure some things out. And in that process, I learned a lot of things. And when I met my wife, the way she was an established person for many years, single for a year, had never been married, had no children, and was extremely successful, an actress for over 20 years, several businesses, very accomplished. And when I met her, I realized that there is no way I would have ever qualified for her before now.
Wow.
I wouldn't have even had the conversation. I wouldn't have even had the patience and the stamina, and my ego would have never been able to handle her success.
Wow. Wow.
I would have been so intimidated and so broken by her level of accomplishment that it would have never worked. I would have always put so much pressure on her to make me feel safe because I was so insecure before. So I had to go through a season of re-anchoring and adjusting my own internal mechanics to learn how to submit, yield, and have patience, or I would have never been qualified for her. And I think those steps has allowed us to have such a solid foundation to allow us to be able to maintain certain disciplines in our life before getting married, and, you know, not being sexual and those kind of things were something that I had to develop in me before I could see them manifest in my relationship.
You said something earlier.
That's wow.
Yeah, that is powerful, right?
Yeah.
You said something earlier that really grabbed my attention. You used the term self-auditing. We talk about self-awareness, but I've never heard the term self-auditing. And I think because you went through that journey of self-auditing, you were able to make sure that you were qualified for your wife when she came. That's a powerful statement. Let's take a turn for a moment. Often when identity becomes shaken, right, faith usually gets tested. So when your identity got shaken, when you went through all of those upheavals, and I'm not going to make a joke like Lynchburg did, but what happened to your faith? What happened to your faith in that season?
I didn't know which one.
Yeah, you know, there's something that happens to a man. You know, I'm a man. I have 3 daughters and I have 1 son. And there's something about telling a father that you're taking his daughter's hand in marriage that always haunted me, you know, because I believed in my heart that every time I got married, I was telling the truth to that man. That man will look at me and say, "I'm giving you my daughter's hand." And I walked away from there feeling as though I deserved that and that I was the right man for the job. But as I look back, there were so many gaps in my development and preparation that I would have never told myself that I was ready for that. And so the fracture in my decision to be ready for the relationship was a result of a fracture that I had inside from God, my relationship with God, and my submittedness to the way things should go, the way things should work. And this is because I didn't have those patterns in place, right? So when you get into those situations where you're confronted with yourself, and to that point about self-auditing, you're unable to recognize where things get off. You find yourself repeating these things over and over again, and then that makes you start to question everything. And so in my life, I found myself questioning God, questioning myself, and to have been called by God at 17 and yet had all of these challenges and hills of relational issues in my life, it definitely made me question if that was really true. Was God really calling me? Was that my emotions? What was really going on? So that sent me on. Well, what I love about it is that sent me on a journey that took me deeper. It took me past traditions and just what I had heard from a pulpit, and to where I went on this journey with God, to where He met me at a place, healed me, and then started to give me the tools so that I could step into relationships all across the board and be better at how to navigate.
Yeah, that's good, man. As you're talking, it really made me reflect on some areas in my own journey where I've had to unlearn some things. So, so can you talk to us about, were there some things you had to unlearn spiritually to rebuild your self emotion? And if so, what were they?
Yeah, I had to unlearn that I can't depend on my faith being rooted in me because of somebody else's experience. And I think for me, I had lived my life in such an admiration for certain people that I had respected and learned from. And I got to the place to where I felt as though, that was enough. Their journey, their experience was enough. I felt like it was enough for me to have been close to knowledge and close to truth and close to wisdom. But I realized, very quick that's not how it works. My own personal journey was necessary. It's going to be necessary for me to have hard experiences to grow from, and so though the journey of self-discovery and a realization that God can meet you where you are has been one of the most powerful revelations I've ever understood, is that, He'll meet me where I am. And then if I can be meek enough to submit to His instruction and the wisdom and counsel that He puts around me, it can reset my entire life, reset my entire outlook. And that's what I find, so much joy in, is that regardless as to what I've been through, regardless as to what seemed to have been the end of my road, the end of my opportunity, God's always been faithful. He's always been there, and He's always been able to pick me up where I was, encourage me, and give me an opportunity to see myself beyond those mistakes.
That's powerful. Deshaun, one of the things like picking up from what you're talking about is that it is possible to be a spirit-filled believer and still be emotionally healthy and balanced mentally, because a lot of times, in those of us, well, I didn't grow up in a Pentecostal tradition, but Pentecostal by experience. But in the Pentecostal experience, many times there's not a whole lot of conversation about emotional intelligence, self-auditing. It's about, defeating the devil and defeating the flesh and being filled with the Holy Ghost. And all that's important, right? But you can't negate the fact that we are a triune being with body, soul, and spirit. So you have come to a place where you are physically healthy, emotionally healthy, and spiritually healthy. Why is that important?
I think it's important because a lot of times I think one of some of the failures that we have in churches is we try to be all things to all people. And it's almost like, the deacon with the club foot, don't usher. Like just don't usher. Just go ahead and just let's not do that. It's like let's get into our areas of expertise. A lot of times the church tries to be everything, and we may not be as equipped to help people with certain levels of issues. There are literally chemical imbalances that people have that a lot of these churches just want to lay hands on you and pray it away. And I think that's dangerous. And I think it's important for us to be sensitive enough to the full spectrum of how people get to where they are to help them understand that your process of healing and growth isn't just going to be because, Revy Rev laid his hands on your head. Like there's a part of the process that's connected to your faith aligning with God's provision for you, but there's also another layer of what may be required to get you out of these situations. And so I think as a body, we have to be more surrendered to the fact that if we don't understand what's necessary, let's bring in those resources to help people get help beyond where we may be able to help them. And I think it's crucial. For me, my spiritual development and growth in Christ has been tremendously stimulated because of my chemical and emotional balance. The awareness, when I found out that there were modalities and things that can help you deal with your anxiety, that wasn't just you waiting on God to do it, having that release from my anxieties being managed and reduced gave me the capacity to receive what God had for me. Because my brain was going so fast at times and I didn't even know how to slow down long enough to process what God was giving me or process what I needed to understand to make certain changes. So I think if we can give people the opportunity to understand that you are a spirit living in a body, but that body, that soul is that mind, will, and the emotions that thinker, feeler, and chooser have to be addressed. They have to be addressed. Your emotions have to be focused on long enough so that you can understand how they move, so that at the ultimate, you can become a person that has feelings, but you aren't governed by your feelings. And that's training, that's development, where you can get to the place to where you start to live your life as your truth being your authority and not your feelings. And that's so important as we process the totality of our walk with Christ, the totality of our walk in the human world. We've got to understand certain things to better decipher why we are the way we are and how we can grow from those things that have trapped us up in the past.
Before we move on, you said something we got to go back to, and I think every man, every listener, but specifically every man needs to kind of go back. You said that you spent 7 years and almost 10,000 hours developing yourself. As men, we go to the gym, we go to college, we get degrees, we have professional development. But the fact, you made me even audit myself, what are we doing specifically to better ourselves, to look at our emotions, conflict resolution, how we communicate, and to invest that was very powerful. And I think that's a lesson that we need to pull away from this. That you, as a man, you have to take that time on yourself.
And brother, but man, I tell you, it was so freeing to understand. But see, I had to learn, right? It wasn't just, these things happening. I just one day had these hours of development. I had to learn that, okay, here's the process of understanding why anxiety is running your life. Here's the process of understanding what's at the root cause of your depression. Let's unravel this. I sat with my therapist one day, and we were talking about relationships. And I was trying to understand why I keep getting into these kind of relationships. What's going on with me? She said, so let's talk about your past. And so she started to break down my past. And I told her some things that my mother went through and some abuse that I seen with my mother. I remember one time even being in the home, my mother was being raped. And I was a kid and I had a basketball and I would throw the basketball against a wall as she would call my name. And I would hear it. And those kind of things created a trauma pattern for me. And so when I was talking to her, I shared that with her. And she said, you know what? 2 things I learned from her. One thing she said, the relationship you find yourself in, you're satisfied from them because of what you can provide in those relationships. And she said, what you've been trying to do all your life is you've been trying to save your mom through the eyes of these other women. So your whole life has been triggered and your whole system has been triggered to be attracted to places you can be a resource to. And so that was something that I had to peel back and go deep into to understand, wow, this is traumatic. Then I said, okay, so why is these relationships keep ending, even those that you say I've attracted? And so I told her about how my mother used to wake me up in the morning, and my room was up a couple floors. And so when I wouldn't wake up, she would yell, Deshaun, get your, and it would frighten me as I woke up. And then when she would talk to me, the way my mom would often look, my mom was a disciplinarian, but the way she would look at me and communicate to me, I didn't realize till years later that it had developed a scar. And so my therapist said, here's your problem. And she said, I guarantee you'll be able to see this. She said, frown face, loud voice causes you to leave. And so the level of intellect in that statement alone made my entire life make sense in relationships, because I was able to look back and say, this is why I never had stamina in a relationship, because the moment you yell at me or have a strength and an energy over me in some kind of way, my mechanic said leave. And so those are the things you learn in therapy, that's in your time away from giving into a relationship that we all should have. Lastly, I'll say we all should be able to look back in our life and find a season of singleness. When were you single? Most of us are orangutans. They even have a theory called the orangutan theory. You ain't gonna see us getting out of one relationship and there ain't another one we swing into. We going from relationship to relationship, because and that's gonna show up in your marriage. If you haven't had listen to me, if you're listening to us right now, if you haven't had a serious season of being single with no situationships, with no side pieces, but just single time with you and yourself and God, you and yourself and your own discovery, it will show up in your marriage. You will have needs that are exaggerated. You will probably be too heavy for a relationship. You're going to be too much for her when she needs you to be little, because your inadequacies are going to show up if you haven't learned how to be single and how to be whole as an individual, especially as a man. I counsel guys all the time to have a challenge when the intimacy isn't consistent, where they feel like their whole world is ending. But it's like, bro, man, I can't, it's been 2 days, man. I can't, they can't even. And what is it? If there's something in their soul that hasn't been calmed down to give them the temperance that's needed in a relationship. And so these are the lessons we learn in our singlehood, so that when we get married, we're not so unsatisfied by the focus of one woman that our lack of discipline sends us elsewhere.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I know one of the things you talked about several times, I think our conversations kind of stayed in this lane. You've talked about the pain of divorce. So just kind of looking back, you actually just started hinting on this in this your last comments. Did your marriage expose the cracks that were already there, or did it reveal parts of you that weren't developed yet?
Both. Yeah, both. It definitely exposed my lack of development, my immaturity. My failures in my marriage were like, it was like a journal that if you opened it up and read, you would see all of the connections to my upbringing. You would see, every insecurity that I had was connected to something I didn't know. Every reaction, you think about it, we should be teaching our children how to react, how to respond, how to handle conflict. Here's a tough one. It sounds like a cuss word. How to handle rejection.
Yeah.
Being able to be told no. There are some of these things that you can understand, even just imagining yourself in these situations, that we don't have any kind of development in that area, because it makes us feel so bad when we're questioned. Why do you feel this feeling when she says, hey, did you pay that bill? Why does it turn you into an animal? Like, why does it have that awkward energy to have a conversation about something because if you feel like you're being questioned, right? So when I look back and audit my relationships in my life, man, I see so much brokenness and so much underdevelopment. And whenever you're underdeveloped, the natural tendency is to overcompensate. And so that was always in my relationships, always in my parenting style. Why? Because I hadn't had a pattern. My therapist said to me one time, she said, if you want to have a different relationship in the future, go find another pattern. And I thought that was so interesting. And so I literally did that. I was working, doing production, and I had got a contract with a church in Hoffman Estates, a gentleman by the name of Gregory Dickow. And when I went up there, I was managing his media production, and I was managing his TV show, and I was producing his radio program, and his children were always around there. And the way this man handled his family changed my life. And so I said, here's my pattern. And I started to just follow him. I had the opportunity to be close in proximity to him to where I could see certain things. And I'll tell you one story real quick. I remember we were working on an anniversary video. And we had been spending weeks on this video, and we're putting all this video together and all this editing. It was a humongous project to the point to where when we finished it on this Saturday, he was coming in to review it. And Sunday, I mean, we've got guests coming in. It's like this place is huge. It's like a $20 million facility. So it's a big deal, this anniversary, right? So we're finishing this video up and we're done. He comes in and looks at it. He said, oh man, that's incredible. All right. All right, good job, guys. Hey man, high fiving me. Everything is good. And this is going to be great tomorrow. Everything's going to be amazing. Oh man, we're so excited. I'm like, wow, we did it. Cause he's a tough cookie. So to have something he approved of was like an accomplishment. And his wife walks in. And she walks in, he said, oh, babe, you got to watch this. Look at this. And I said, okay, let's look. We sat and we watched, and she turned it on and she was looking at it. And she said, okay, well, hey, guys, can you hold it 1 second? Guys, that part right there, can you change that one clip? Now, to do that would have required us to go get tapes, old beta tapes, find it in the library and do all these things. And so I would sit down and say, well, I said, ma'am, in all due respect, maybe we can do that on the next version. He said, hold on, D, hold on. Wait. What you say, baby? Well, what'd you say? What do you need? Okay, why? When I saw him shut us all down, stop us, and look her in her eyes like she mattered, he had to look in his eyes as though if she says something that needs to be fixed and we can't do it, we might just reschedule the anniversary. Wow. And to me, that marked my life. It marked my intention as a man. It marked my pattern as a husband. I said, when I'm a husband again, I got to carry that kind of character to where my wife understands her value to me is connected to, I don't care what anybody else has to say. Her voice is the voice. This is it. And so what she has to say carries weight. And it's those kind of things that my underdevelopment and my therapy taught me to pay attention to. And those patterns turned into things that I am now seeing manifest in my life.
Wow. I mean, that example alone is very powerful because sometimes men have a different perspective what marriage is. When we talked about it Sunday, a couple of men had a perspective of my wife should do this, she should do that, she should do this, rather than having a real perspective of what it means to serve each other. You, based upon who you are and what we know, you were established spiritually before you got into marriage, right? And there was some emotional development. But when you entered the marriage versus when you came out, what parts of the emotions and the spirituality that you had to confront and change?
Wow. Well, I think the biggest one I kind of hinted on a little bit earlier is I had to realize that everything that happened to me wasn't everybody else's fault. And so I had to take a real introspective examination and own that this was my fault. Like that the failure in this marriage was my fault. And so, it's like as a man, when we step into these relationships and take the banner of being the head of the house and the leader, well, that means the buck stops with you. It doesn't mean that your voice is this superior tone. It means that at the end of the day, if the short end of the stick is being passed out, it's coming to you, right? So at the end of the day, my role as a master builder isn't always going to receive an accolade. So I had to understand that, because I had these desires in my marriages that didn't work, that were way out of line and out of bounds. They were connected to my own inadequacies that turned into things that I wanted from a marriage that I don't think they were ever designed to give me. So the spiritual development kept me aware, but one thing I didn't have, although I had the spiritual development, was I didn't have character development. So my lack of character,
Yes, sir.
if your character isn't
Yes, sir.
developed, you can have all of the spiritual awareness, but that ability to act on the awareness goes down. But the character that you have is what allows you to use the wisdom that you understand and learn and see it manifest in your life. So my life now, everybody around me always hear me say, I'm always judging the fruit of a thing. It's like, I'm not going to just sit and be okay with my effort alone. I'm judging the fruit. Did it work? Am I seeing the fruit in my wife? Is she consistently okay? Have I created an atmosphere where she's safe to communicate to me? So it doesn't matter how much spiritual authority I have and how many tongues I can talk in. If I don't know how to talk to that woman that's in my house, then I got more lessons to learn, right? We got to go back, and we got to reset, because my desire and purpose under God to this marriage is to serve her. And we fight that battle with each other. Who's going to outserve each other? And I take that very serious. It's her first. And so I think if we take that mindset, we start to create something that we need in our relationships, which is alignment. Because when we put it in the right order, it's going to be easy to fly. I don't have to tell my wife, hey, I'm the leader. You got to follow my authority. I'm the, you got to respect. If the moment you got to say that, you've already lost. It's all, just pack it up. Pack it up. If she's not inspired to follow you, you're doing something wrong. If she doesn't wake up asking, if your wife doesn't ask you questions, if she doesn't desire your opinion, you're doing something wrong, because inside of her, there's a desire that God has placed there to crave for the wisdom for the man of God in her life. And if it's not coming out, she's not desiring it, your ego and your attitude has placed a block up that makes her not desire your wisdom. And that's going to start to erode the relationship.
Wow. Man, that is it's funny. I got married in 2003, and in 2017, we joined a new church, and we joined the marriage department, and it was a class. And in that class, that's when I learned that marriage is service. The goal is to outserve each other. And the basics is, if you're doing, or you're serving her and she's serving you, then both parties are happy. But a lot of people aren't taught that in marriage. Wow.
Listen, it helps everything. Listen, I know this is a family program, but I'll say this, your sexual relationship is solved when you understand service.
Yeah.
Wow.
When you understand service, my mindset about the intimacy I share with my wife, my mindset is, my goal in this experience is for her. I'm not coming into this because of my needs. And I've had to rewire that in my life so that I can keep reminding myself that this experience isn't about me. I am trusting that if I am serving her properly through this experience, I'll be taken care of.
For sure.
Wow.
So it's an order. And if we looked at that in our entire life, and we put that kind of perspective in our relationships, we'll see something that I didn't see in my earlier marriages, which is alignment. And that alignment makes things flow so much more simple, and you don't have to reach and work so hard to get this thing you're after, because when you're connected with God's order, there's a flow that happens in your life that turns into something that you enjoy, and you don't start to resent your marriage. And a lot of times we resent our marriage, and we're frustrated in what we're connected to, all because we're out of alignment. We're searching for our own gratification instead of becoming a master servant.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Wow.
I think it left everybody speechless. Huh?
Yeah, you all right over there?
Wow.
So, well, I know we're coming to a close, but Deshaun, if you could leave us with this, what would you tell a man who feel like he's gone too far to restore his life?
I would tell him, man, I've been married 3 times, brother. You ain't gone too far. Okay. Like my life it should not be where I shouldn't be where I'm at. God has given me so many opportunities and so many chances that about 100 ago I should be done. There shouldn't the grace of God is so infinite, and God's love is so tangible that he is standing waiting for you to just surrender, and he'll take you right where you are and bring you right back into what you were always destined for. So you're never too old, you're never too young, but you are always at a point where you need to judge your readiness. Right. So although God gives you the opportunity at any stage, you've got to judge, are you ready for this? So I would tell any man that, be prepared to examine and confront your past. Be prepared to look at and face the child support. Don't get into a relationship, bro. You ain't even talking about the child support. I mean, let's, don't do it. Don't do it to yourself, because it's going to come up. And it's going to be frustrating because you're going to have to expose and be honest about certain things. Talk about the mistakes in your past that are close to you. Like if you got some issues with the past relationship that was in a year ago, like these things, and you're in a new relationship, you got to talk about these things, because your restoration and the sustainability of the new you, so to speak, is going to be connected to your purity. So if just because you move out of state and get a new haircut doesn't change what you left in Alabama. It doesn't change that. So what's going to determine if you're ready for this next relationship, ready for this next journey that God has for you, is going to be how ready are you to face the music? How ready are you to look at where you've been? And I'm not saying that that's easy, but that's what's going to help you understand when you're ready. But if you're still hiding, shucking and jiving, and they say how you meet this girl, and you say, yeah, you got any kids? Yeah, I got my boy, and you got 8 kids, and you can't say that. You can't come. I was talking to my wife. We were talking in the first. You have to ask. And within the first, the second day, when I knew that this could be something, the first thing I said, and this is just some notes for y'all. Y'all can say it like this because it worked. I said, I got to tell you some things. I said, but there's a story, so listen to the finish. And so she said, okay. So she sat there and I told her my story, and the purity in my story will make sense to a real person. And I don't have to eliminate the painful parts, because everybody has a journey. Everybody has a story. So your story does not have to be without the mistakes, because the beauty in the story, just even like a film, the beauty in the story is the ending. The beauty in the story sometimes isn't even the ending. Sometimes it's the sequel. Sometimes a story in a film wasn't even finished till 4 films. So you got to keep going and realize that your story is just right now at a middle ground. And as you yield yourself to face those issues that you've come out of, the future is waiting for you to just yield to the things and be honest about where you are. And as you do that, there's something so beautiful about just being exposed. I could stand on the internet or on television, and there is no woman on the planet that's going to come and say, I'm in her DMs, or I'm talking to her, or I flirted with her at the grocery store. Not in the entire world. There will never. When I met my wife, from the moment I met her, I never spoke to another woman in a DM, it flirtatiously, none, all of that's out. But that came from the work, and that prepared me to have my heart open. And that's the life that we want to live. And that's where your freedom, your opportunity is going to start, when you get to that place of saying, you know what, no more games, no more secrets, purity of heart, character development. And it's time now to walk with God. That's where we start.
Yeah, man, that's powerful. And so before we also close out, Deshaun, we know you do several things, several different projects as a creative, as a mentor. Let our listeners know, and we're going to have you back, brother. I already know that.
So, man, I love it. I love
it. But let our listeners know how they can connect with you on social media, through the internet, how they can take advantage of any services or programs that you have.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the best ways to reach me, my website is DeshaunDavis.com, DeshaunDavis.com. I'm on Instagram primarily, so it's Think Deshaun. My handle is Think Deshaun, and I would say Instagram would be a good place. We kind of hover in Instagram and talk about a lot of things that we're doing there. And we've got a lot of things going on in the music space and in the film space. But at the end of the day, you can look closely at everything that I do, and it's about telling the story. And so we start, telling out the right story in our lives, and telling the stories that matter. So that's what I do as a filmmaker and as a creator, is we want to tell these stories, because when we're gone away, we want those stories to be here so that people can have tangible resources to help them develop and move past situations that have stumbled them and that they've stumbled upon in their lives. So so that's the quick answer.
Awesome. Well, to our listeners, before we leave, I want to leave you with this. Sometimes what breaks in your life isn't meant to destroy you. It's meant to expose who you weren't ready to be. Divorce can break identity. Depression can break ego. Failure can break illusion. But here's what you need to know. Breaking isn't the end. It's the beginning of becoming honest. So maybe the real question isn't, why did this happen to me? Maybe it's, who am I supposed to become because of it? If you're listening today and you feel like life doesn't make sense, maybe you're in the middle of reconstruction. And reconstruction isn't glamorous, but it's powerful. This concludes another episode of The Lifeline with your host, Barry J. Elliott, Lindsberg Petway, and yours truly, Bo Powell, and our guest, Deshaun Davis. We're on a mission to bring light and life into the places people don't always talk about. So stay with us, join the conversation, and let us hear from you, because the Lifeline exists to speak life into your life. Real brothers, real life, real conversations. Y'all take care.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with host, business expert, and life coach Bo Powell, social media influencer and entrepreneur Lindsberg Petway, and leadership coach and mental health advocate Barry J. Elliott. Join us next week for another impactful conversation on The Lifeline. God bless.